Dear Father God, thank you so much for this day. I pray that everybody here will get one tidbit, nugget, something that they could take into their future and bring value to Oklahoma, to the world, and to their families, and to you. I pray that you'd give us the right words, and just pray that you'd do the right thing. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, guys, pray for all the food that you heathens ate that didn't pray over it. All right. Cash flow night, guys. We got a cash flow night coming up here in a couple weeks. Look for it on our website. We're going to have it right here. Going to do it in 2 months. I forgot the date. I forgot to write down the date. But anyway, that's going to be coming up. And then other than that, story time. So one of the reasons that we're up here today is Jack and I was having a conversation, and he was buying a house with a contract for deed. And so I just want to tell you a little story about mine. I went out and I bought, I've done quite a few contract for deeds. I had 68 of them at one point in time, was my max. I'm down to less than 10 of them now, I think 9 or 10 of them. I'm trying to get out of that business as much as possible. They changed laws and all those things. I did a lot of them back before Dodd-Frank and all those other things came around, where it was the Wild West and you could do it a lot easier. So anyway, business model changed. I realized too that young men shouldn't be doing contract for deeds because they pay off, unfortunately. I say I used to have 68 of them because a lot of them paid off, and I didn't screw people and some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So I actually let people take contract, and I actually fulfilled my obligation. During COVID, about every month I had somebody bringing me 20 to 30 grand and paying off a house. It was great because I got little chunks of cash, but it wasn't great because I planned on them paying me off for another 10 to 15 years. And so I lost a lot of cash flow during that time. So some things to think about. So anyway, story time. I go in and during COVID, market's hot, right? And so my realtor calls me and says, "Hey, Andrew, go to this house. I got a contract. I can't show it to you, but get over there." She goes, I told them that we're going to put a contract on it today. Like, my realtor calls me and says, "We're putting a contract on this house today. I've already got the in your inbox, but she won't let us sign the paperwork till you go look at it. Go now." $15,000 house. We've been working together for a long time. She knows I'm going to buy it. Obviously, when your realtor calls you and says, "Hey, you're buying a house today," it's like, "Oh, okay, I guess I better get over there." So I run over there. There are 6 people in the parking lot. There's people in the parking lot running around this place. And one lady's looking for a realtor. So I run in the back door, look at it, and of course lock the back door as I walk out the door, and so that nobody else could go look at the house. And doing my due diligence. And the lady said something. She said something about the house, and I said, "I don't know. It's already under contract," because I literally walked out in the car and put it under contract. So she was like, "What? They told me I could go look at it." I was like, "I don't know what's going on." So I walked out and bought this house. Had some stuff in it, but you could tell somebody kicked in the back door a couple times. It's been ransacked. It looks like one of my tenants that moved out in a hurry, right? So anyway, fast forward, we buy the house, we get through this process, and the son calls and says, "Hey," we put a note on the door. It's like, "Hey, by the way, I used to do this. I don't do this anymore." Put a note on the door. It's like, "Hey, we bought this house." Just so the neighbors can know if there's somebody breaks in or there's having problems, the neighbors have our telephone number. So I used to put signs out and say, "Hey, we bought this house." Anyway, the guy calls us and says, "Hey, this is my house. I was renting here, and they took my stuff, and they didn't do due process." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, well," he shows me a picture of his ID. It matches the address, and we're like, "Okay, well, come get your stuff." Nobody's been living there. And also, mind you, this was after 3 weeks he calls us. So obviously he's not staying here. They've been using this as storage. So we meet the guy. He goes over, cleans out the stuff. Comes over with a little bitty car to come clean out an entire house. So he calls us again like 3 times, wants us to meet us over there to go clean out this house. Finally, I'm like, "Look, it's all in the dumpster. Get the rest of the stuff that you want to go get." 9 and a half, 10 months later, we got the thing remodeled, but we bought it for $15,000, their asking price. We put another 20 into it. Completely remodeled it. The ceiling was caving in the living room. They had couches and stuff out there, but the ceiling was literally caved in, insulation everywhere. We get a lawsuit, and of course, I think it's from this guy. We have a tenant. "I'm suing you. I'm taking everything you own, blah, blah, blah." So my wife and I, we create a great case against this guy, and we're like, "Here's where we did the eviction. Here's where we filed the paperwork. We didn't evict him for any other reason. We just terminated his lease, but he's going to sue us all this stuff." So we put this whole case together, and I come in there with a freaking folder, ready to defend myself against this small claims court. I walk over there, and she's like, so-and-so. And I'm like, I have no idea who this lady is. So I go before the judge, and I'm like, Judge, I have no idea who she is, da-da-da. And she does the indigenous or something like that, where basically you're too poor to be able to afford anything. So they provided all the paperwork for her, did it all for her. And the judge looks at her and says, look, and she's like, I want to go forward right now. She goes, he owes me money. And I was like, Your Honor, I have no idea who she is. I don't even have a case to build against her. I don't even have a defense against this case. And the judge says, hey, come back in 30 days. And you can't, and she looked at her and said, ma'am, you have to tell him why he's being sued. Like, you just can't sue somebody. And she literally I'm suing him because. And that's all the paperwork, the paperwork literally was like, she's suing us. That's it. So anyway, I go back up there. I explain it. We bought it through a title company, bought it through a real estate agent. So I go through all the documents, which you make them sign every single time. The document, what's that document where they have to say where you don't have any other liens or judgments?
Or anybody has ownership. Yeah, it's the closing affidavit.
Closing affidavit.
Yeah.
So he signs the closing affidavit for me, right? I might have even gone, no, I don't think it was with you. Anyway, we close the affidavit. We go through this whole process. And she sues me. I win in a court. Like, the judge looks at her, right, and says, hey, you have no, he signed it, he did it. He did not do anything against you. You need to go sue the guy who you did the contract for deed for. Great. 3 months, month and a half later, literally 11 months, 3 weeks, because you have 1 year. She sues us again. All right, second lawsuit. Say, this time it's the big court. So we have to go hire an attorney. We have to go defend ourselves. So we go through this whole process and win. That attorney hands us a bill for, how much was it again? $25,000 to defend myself on a contract for deed.
That's called preclusion. It should have never been that, but it was.
Preclusion, should have never gotten to that point. But I had to go defend myself on this deal, and she was suing me for $55,000 on a $15,000 house for all of her belongings, which in the first court of law, I already showed her the pictures. The back door was kicked in. I showed him a picture of everything. The judge even went through and says, here's a list of all the things that she says that you took out of the house. And she looked right at me and she says, was there a blender in the house? I was like, ma'am, there was a whole bunch of crap in the middle of the floor. Like, somebody went through the kitchen cabinets and dumped everything out in the middle of the kitchen floor. There could have been a blender there. Okay. Was there clothes in there? There was no clothes. Our big thing was she had hats. It was hats and dishes. I was like, there was no hats and there was no crystal in the house whatsoever. And so she was like, oh. So anyway, that was her big lawsuit. Anyway, we won that one. And I think we have 4 more payments left to the attorney still. Now, fortunately, title insurance did kick in, and they did give us $15,000. So fortunately, we went through the title company. We did all that. I thought that the title company, to me, it made more sense for the title company to use their own attorneys to defend the case, but instead they wrote us a check. I don't know why, but now with a $25,000 bill, now I understand. I realize they got out. They got out for cheaper than they thought they were going to.
Now we know they don't defend you.
Yeah.
You're on your own.
Yeah.
You get the money maybe, but they won't defend you. You're on your own.
Yeah. So you're not getting. So that was my first. That was one of my experiences on the other end of this. And Jack and I was talking about this. He has another situation. So that's one of my stories. Second story. Both these happened during COVID, right? You couldn't go in and go talk to people. There was a lot of times where you couldn't go in and interact with people. The market shot way up, and everybody saw all their contract for deeds that they had sold, all these people, and all of a sudden it went from a $30,000 house to a $120,000 house, and all of a sudden they were like, hey, let's go sell it. So we had another guy. We bought this house, and we go through the title paperwork. They hand us a lease, all that good stuff. And so we come over there and tell them, like, hey, we're the new landlords. Here's, in typical fashion, pay your rent. He comes on and says, hey, I have a pipe under my house that needs to be fixed. So we go over there to go fix the pipe, and then my guy says, hey, Andrew, you need to get over here. There's something going on over here. He says, I own this house. You don't own this house. I own this house. And I'm like, okay, cool. Show me your paperwork. So he brings me out this whole stack of paperwork here. And he signed every single page. No notary. Nobody else signed any of this document. And it's not legal in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it's just a whole bunch of paperwork that he signed. And at the end of it, it says that he needs to execute this contract by putting a $10,000 down payment, which he never did. So he never executed his contract. So he thinks he's living in this house. He pays it off in his mind. They go through the entire eviction process, and they go through the whole process. At the end, they decided to give it to us. Great. So we end up having to go through the rest of the process and get him kicked out of the property. He won't pay his rent. He won't do increases. I'm like, I'm sorry. If you really thought you were buying this house, and if they screwed you, please call an attorney and go sue this previous person, because we didn't do anything by it. And let's face it, I have a loan now on this house. I paid $53,000 for the house. I just put another $20-something thousand into the house, or I'm got to go put another $20-something thousand into the house. Anyway, we get him out of the property. He now comes back every month for probably 6 months and harasses my tenants. So fortunately, one of my tenants, he was like, all right, he's like, I keep inviting him in, but he won't come in for some reason. He's like, as long as I'm legal, and he doesn't have a legal right to be here, I legally have. So he keeps inviting him in because he's going to take him out. But he still harasses my tenant now, and this has been going on for 3 years. He still calls us about once a month. We've done harassment. We've filed harassment charges against him. We've done some other legal things that we've been able to do. But still, he'll get drunk about every couple months, and he'll just get pissed off and decide to start calling us or texting us or putting notices on their doors. That's been another experience that we had. A third experience, yes, guys, this keeps going on. One of the reasons that I was like, Jack, how can we stop this from happening? I have another house, the guy is living in the back. He has a adobe fireplace that looks like something you'd see on YouTube, built inside of his house with a washer hose out the back, and that was how he's heating his house. Just imagine like the smoke damage. This place was terrible. I bought the place for $24,000, something like that. I mean, this place is a dump, all right? So we finally, probate situation, I don't exactly know. We get this guy out of the house. And now he's claiming that he owns the house, once again. Has no paperwork, no documentation. He says he's been paying the taxes. The daughter shows us the tax bill where she's been paying the taxes for the last 5 years, where she's trying to work this grandma's probate. They finally get her out of the property. They finally get this thing situated. That guy sends a certified notice to our tenants, every 3 to 6 months, and comes by and harasses our tenants every 3 to 6 months. Tell them, we own this house, I own this house, you took it illegally, there's whatever the deal is. So now we have a documentation on him that we're trying to go against, but unfortunately, we don't have a case against him because he's not harassing us, he's harassing our tenants, and our tenants are like, you need to deal with this, we don't want to deal with it. That's why we're tenants. We want to be homeowners. We've been homeowners. So those have been some of the experiences I've had with rent-to-owns. We could get into so many more stories on the other side of me buying the rent-to-owns and selling them to other people, and how people have gone through and done remodels on them. And when I say remodels, removed all the sheetrock, all the electrical, all the plumbing, and then handed it back to me 3 or 4 times. I've got one right now that we're still dealing with, and she removed all. We don't want to get into that. I don't want that to be recorded for legal purposes. The lawsuit might be coming up soon, and we might have to start doing some court hearings soon on that one. So, guys, there is some real complications that when you guys start getting creative, starts causing some problems. And the more creative you get, when somebody's like, I've got a creative deal, I'm like, oh crap, how am I going to get screwed? Right, because there's a law, and somebody's trying to go against the outside of the typical title companies, outside of the typical realm, which a lot of times we have to get deals closed. There's a lot of times that we can't get things done through the typical chain of command and the typical things that needs to be done. So that's why we're here. But at the same time, buyer beware. When you're buying something or selling something, we're going to talk a little bit more today about how to protect yourself against those things. Because the last thing I want, fortunately for me, those situations happened to me when I already had a lot of houses and had a lot of experience. If those two would have happened to me on my first and second deal, I'd be bankrupt right now, and I'd be talking to you about how terrible real estate is and how I never want to do another real estate deal. So fortunately for those things happened later on in my career where we were able to handle it, and it wasn't a big deal. Unfortunately, my first ones. But I've had people that my first, second, or third deal went bankrupt. Well, the first or second loan that they wrote, somebody went bankrupt on them or pulled out their money, or the first loan they did, Chase took all their money and wouldn't give it back to them or something like that. And they were fighting it for months. I'm like, maybe this isn't such a great deal. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over and let you talk about what we can do to protect ourselves in this situation.
Yes. So, hi, everybody. I'm Lindsay. I work at Oklahoma City Abstract. It's a pleasure to be here today with you guys. So we are seeing more and more people buying homes and then selling them to people on contract for deed, because right now it helps you get money, helps you cash flow, helps the numbers make sense, for your transaction. We just really want you to protect yourselves too, because typically you would go file those contract for deeds in the county clerk's record, and what it does is put you in title and also the person you've signed your contract for deed in title, where you're both own title to the property, which is great. But then what if you're a person who has contract for deed files bankruptcy or has tax liens? Well, then unfortunately those attach to the property too. So a lot of people aren't wanting to file them for that reasons, along with maybe other reasons of who they're making the contract for deed to and whether they'll be around or not very long. So, that does cause problems when they're not filed of record and you want to go sell the property and you're not necessarily forthcoming with your buyer that you're selling it to, that you have a contract for deed. You just say you have a tenant, we're selling it, here you go, buy the property. Well, then the tenants can come back and say, hey, we have an ownership interest in this property, and they produce a contract for deed to us, the new buyer, and then that's when the title insurance claim starts. And it's a problem, because then you as the seller can be sued. We go after everybody, our attorneys do. So anyway, but this is ways to protect yourself too when you're buying contract for deed. Ask questions of the people you're buying the property from. Ask to see these agreements ahead of time. If there's people in the property, talk to them. Get to know them to make sure, because this is happening more and more often than not. So it is a problem. I'm not good at public speaking, so.
You're doing great.
Yeah. So.
She closes millions and millions of contracts for me and does all kinds of deals and knows she's my go-to person for all this stuff. So.
But we have seen more claims as a title insurance company recently due to contract for deeds. Like I know 6 or 7 we've had just in the past 12 months. And it has been because the people living in the home, or some of them not living in the home, do have a signed contract for deed with the person they bought the property from. And they've paid these people money, and the people just sell it out from under them in a way. And so it is costly, because as a title insurance company, it's not like homeowners insurance. We don't just say, okay, like you had a $15,000 owner's policy. We're going to just give you $15,000. Our policy allows us to go and litigate it and try to clear the title before having them pay out, because we try to make it right before we pay out the policy. So, and you're only insured for what you purchase your title insurance for. So, you may get a great deal of a house for $40,000 and end up $40,000 in renovating, but your title insurance is only going to pay out and cover you for that up to $40,000 is also another thing to keep in mind. But the policy does give us a right to litigate the claim before buying someone off or buying the house back from you, or whatever the situation may be on that type of transaction. So I gave some examples, I know, on my little handout that's fancy, about some claims that we do have going on right now. Like there is one, as you mentioned, it was an individual guy, his first home to flip. Like his mom took a line of credit out on her house. He paid cash. He was so excited. We have been fighting this for a year now, and finally we're going to pay the contract for deed got filed 2 days after he bought the property. The lady went and filed it. She hasn't lived in the house for 10 years. The person he bought it from says she defaulted on a payment. She hadn't, but he doesn't have proof that he canceled the contract for deed with her. He never served her, never sent certified letters that you've defaulted and we're taking it back over, which is something you should do to protect your interest if you're not going to go file it of record, and then foreclose them out. So you have to do your due diligence to cancel that, because then you as a seller could also get dragged into a lawsuit or claims process. So, and this is not legal advice. I just work for a title company. I am not an attorney.
Yeah, go ahead, give your legal speech. Here you go.
So I
have a question on that. In lieu of contract, if they sign that, that's sufficient? I heard you say certified. Are we supposed to do something in addition to in lieu of contract?
I just said, so I have a customer who is selling a whole bunch on contract for deed. Nobody heard that. Anyway, I recommend, we talked and we came to maybe a recommendation that when he has these contract for deeds signed, because his concern is that people might get deported because they're not residents, to have them sign a release and quit claim deed at closing just to protect his paperwork, or at closing. We don't close them, but when he has them signed. But I also said to take that a step further, since they're signing that when they sign the agreement, that if they do break the agreement and they're gone, that you should try to serve them and should try to do that certified mail so that they can't say, well, you had me sign that, when I signed the deed, and now you're canceling it and I didn't know anything about it, just as an extra precaution so that they don't get dragged into something later. Since, because they're doing it all at once, all the paperwork at once. Yeah.
Lindsay, how many people do you know are using servicing companies? Because that's what we'll do. We'll be a servicing company, they'll hold the deed, everything gets paid through them, so if
Yeah.
you default on the contract,
Then it's the servicing, which is a good protection for you. Yeah. So I have maybe, and it's more so much on the subject to transactions that people are doing servicing, because I have one customer, because he doesn't want to mess with it because he's buying a whole bunch and he just has set up a servicing company. But that's a way to safeguard you too, is through that servicing company. And that way they have the paper trail of the default. Like I said, you just want to be protected yourself in case you go sell it, so that these people don't come back and you don't get dragged into a lawsuit for a title claim because of this contract for deed 5 years ago that someone defaulted on, and you've moved on. So anything you can do also to protect yourself down the line is, good due diligence.
One more quick question. I don't know, I haven't done one in Oklahoma. So in Oklahoma, once the property gets sold to the new person, you're just holding the deed back, correct? They just don't have access to the deed.
Correct. So, yeah, and
How is somebody, if I'm a seller and I do a contract for deed with Tony, he's the new owner. How am I then selling the property to Andrew?
because you're not filing the deed because you're not being unscrupulous. So you could hold a contract for deed with Tony, but then Andrew could say, hey, I'm looking for this kind of house and I'm willing to pay you X amount of dollars. You're like, I could pocket a quick another $20,000 real quick, and this contract for deed's not filed of record. So, and as far as Andrew knows, I'll just tell him it's leased to Tony and they can figure it out later.
Tony would still be on title, correct?
That's if you file the contract for deed, because
That's if you file.
so a lot of people aren't filing them, because if you do file it and Tony defaults, you have to go through foreclosure. You have to foreclose him out and get him back out of title. And like I said, as I mentioned, if Tony files bankruptcy, has a judgment IRS lien, and then defaults, well, you can't foreclose out the IRS lien. You could be stuck with the liens if Tony defaults also. I mean, you could foreclose them out, but it's a problem, because some people will get a deed in lieu and, like you said, get them to deed the property back, but then you're still stuck with the judgments and liens from Tony on your property.
Yeah, I mean, it's no different than a bank.
Yes, exactly. You're just the bank.
We do this every single day. This is not.
Yeah, but
It sounds to me like it's not a tool. An executory contract is a tool.
yes.
So it's people not doing their due diligence and doing the paperwork
Correct. Yeah, because a lot of people are not. Well, and plus, here's another reason a lot of people don't want to file them, is you're going and you're taking out a mortgage, or you want to refinance your loan, here in a year or two. If that contract for deed is filed, you have to then get Tony to deed the property back to you.
Sure.
And Tony, like I said, I've had this happen. Tony doesn't want to deed the property back. It's Tony's property. It's not your property to go mortgage or refinance in Tony's eyes. And so then you can do that. But then if your mortgage company finds out you sold the property on contract for deed, they can call your note due. So, yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of, red tape to go through on that, where people aren't wanting to, file those.
Will you be covering the distinction between selling something on contract for deed versus lease with option to buy? Because I've always understood that's the best way to go.
Yeah, it's with the lease with the option to buy. So that's a little different, because then they can just buy the property for you and you credit them so much back, whatever your terms are at closing. It's a little different than a contract for deed. The lease with option to buy, I mean, you would still kind of need to disclose that to a new buyer, but it is different than contract for deed.
Yeah, my understanding is one of the biggest benefits, you don't have to go through foreclosure.
Yeah.
Because there was never any agreement to buy.
To buy.
It was just given the option to buy, and they pay you monthly premium
Yeah.
for that option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll make one other suggestion is, who I talked to you about, Caleb Christopher.
Uh-huh.
You need to hire a transaction coordinator that knows how to do the paperwork.
Yeah.
If you're doing these without a transaction coordinator, you're gonna end up in situations like Andrew and other people.
Yeah, and most of them are
It's gonna happen.
just doing them themselves and in-house notarizing them.
It can help you. I have one coming, I'm not gonna make a plug here, but I have one coming for April 1st. So get with me afterwards and I'll teach you how you can.
But it's just, you want to protect yourself, more so if you go sell the property and you're not necessarily forthcoming with the people, because you will get dragged into a lawsuit through a title claim and whatnot. So on these, contract for deed transactions. And I know they make sense because you're like, ooh, $20,000 now, and then I'm still cash flowing $200 a month. But if you go sell the property, like I said, it's going to cost more than that $20,000.
Lindsay, so with that lease, going back to that lease with option to purchase, I have a property that I'm looking to buy and then go to do contract for deed on. Should I be considering changing it from doing contract for deed to lease with option to purchase? Like, I guess I'm not aware of the pros and cons of each of those.
And I can't say I'm 100% aware of that either. The pros and cons of because I haven't ever really seen. I've seen one person who does a lot of the leased option to purchases that I do. But you might want to talk to an attorney to get the exact word, which would be best for you.
One of the things I've noticed too is the tax implications when you do a sell. Because you're supposed to, when you sell that property on a contract for deed, you're supposed to capitalize that entire sale of that property
At the time of the contract.
At the time of the contract. So that's one of the disadvantages that I noticed on it is unless you have a whole bunch of rollover depreciation or you got a bunch of stuff like that, when you sell that contract for deed, you have to capitalize that profit. And I'm not a CPA, I'm not an attorney, blah, 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 all that good stuff. But from what I wasn't quite sure if that meant, let's say I sell the house to you for $150,000 on a contract for deed, if that meant that I collect all that $150,000 on my taxes and because I sold it on a gains on that $150,000, or if that is since I bought it for $100 and I'm selling it to you for $150, or if it's a $50,000 gain. But the way that my CPA was explaining it, it turns out to be a $150,000 gain because I'm turning that $150,000 into a note. And so it's a new product.
Yes.
And so now I get the tax advantages and tax implications of a note, but I have to pay the taxes on it first.
The capital gain.
And so that was like one of the big things that when I really dug in deep on the contract for deeds and stuff like that, if you do them right, and the right way that they're talking about, then you have to capitalize on your taxes and things like that and what have you. So that's been some of the pros and cons to the contract for deeds and the different ways. So talk to your CPA, of course, and then, of course, talk to Jackie or some of these other people that have done a lot more. We're not attorneys. We've just done it.
This is just life experiences.
Yeah, I paid attorneys a lot of money, and I've gotten...
Yeah.
And guys, I'll just tell you, I would be up about $4 million if I didn't do contract for deeds. Like, I would be up, like literally up $4 million. We would be retired living in, and we would not be here. We'd be sitting next to Robert Elder on Maui right now if I didn't do contract for deeds, okay?
Is that just because you sold the property?
Yeah, I didn't get the cap.
You sold it.
Yes, absolutely. I sold them. I sold all those. I had 68 of them. If I had those 68 properties today, they would have doubled, tripled, quadrupled in value. I sold them for $30,000. They're worth $120 today, And now I wouldn't have had 68 of them. I probably would have had like 50 of those properties because I would have had to spend some more money fixing them up. But single-family homes, guys, as far as rentals go, are not that difficult. Apartments, I'm realizing apartments are a lot more difficult, a lot more turnover, a lot more headaches. But when single-family homes, like somebody moves into it, our average stay time's like 7.5, 8 years. So, yes, I did get nice little deposits. Yes, it got me out of the rat race faster, and it did a lot of things. But when I look back over the long-term appreciation and the tax advantages and everything else, I would be up at least $3 to $4 million in my pocket. Not like net worth in my pocket, able to retire if I didn't do all this contract for deeds. So, I like the idea of contract for deeds when you're old. When you're done with the tenants, when you're done with all that stuff, and you're like, hey, I maybe got 20 years left on this earth. Let's go ahead and put them on 30-year contract for deeds and do something like that. If you don't like your children and you don't want to give it to them, then that works very well. If you like your children, then, maybe you want to give some of that generational wealth to them and give them, 10 or 15 paid off houses might be really nice. So those are the kind of things you guys need to really look at. When I sit down with my students and I'll start asking them, like, I want to do contract for deeds. I'll be like, start asking, first thing I ask them, how old are you? All right, cool. Do you like your children? All right. Do you have children? Okay, I don't have children. I'm like, okay, well then fine. Then that's not such a problem. So think about those things when you're going forward and what exit strategies and what strategies, because the market is changing, as you said. I remember about a year and a half, 2 years ago, somebody came in and it's like, have you heard about this new thing? Contract for deeds. You could sell houses. And I'm just like laughing at him because I've already gone through that market cycle and already come back through. Solomon says meaningless says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. Generations come and generations come, and the earth remains the same. So we're just in that same market cycle that you've seen, and we're in that market cycle right now where people are like, oh, I can't make money doing this, so let's go do contract for deeds. Somebody makes some money, does a TikTok on it, and then everybody starts doing it. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of these laws are coming into, where we're starting to see the government is getting involved in our real estate transactions, is because people are doing this. And unfortunately, they have to start creating laws because this happens once. Okay, you're telling me 10 times? That's a lot. I'm a bigger guy than most, but I'm not like the Robert Elder that has thousands and thousands of homes. This has happened to me 3-4 times now on the few transactions that I've done. So it's a problem. And so they're going to have to start putting more rules and regulations in place because there's too many dishonest people.
There are. Like I said, we've had 7 to 8 claims, I think, just in the past 12 months, just contract for deed claims. So it is a big problem, and it's not people I deal with every day, So it's people I deal with every day buying these homes who are in these bad situations, who are having, like I said, to hold them, you're having to pay your hard money lender, whatever short-term lender, your interest. You can't cash flow, you can't sell it, you can't refinance it because we're litigating, we're trying to clear the title for you, but at the same time you're having the holding cost of this home you can't do anything with until the title's clear from these contract for deeds.
So, and like one of my instances right now, I've got a 6-month loan that went past due. Well, guess what happens? Points and penalties. And if I've got something like this where I'm going for 3 to 6 month prime, now I'm paying hard money loans, and then I go pay an extra 3 points, and I've got another 3 points. Now, fortunately, most of the time, if you're dealing with a good lender, they can work with you.
Yeah.
And you
because they've been dragged into the title claim too, because they have a loan on the property. So they're very well aware of what's going on also because they have a claim now on the property.
But it's ultimately your problem. So on all my cases, my bank doesn't know about none of my problems. Like, I didn't involve them in any way, shape, or form. My bank called me in one day. We're having a conversation. I was like, hey, do you know about this situation we're having? Like, no. And they started getting all nervous. So I was like, we'll figure it out. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And they didn't call me back. And like a year later, like, did you get it figured out? Like, yes, thanks a lot for your help. So these are things that you have to be responsible for. Or unfortunately, you're responsible for. And that big old stack of documents that she has you sign, there's a reason behind each and every one of those. And unfortunately, they're adding in more documents every time I go in there. They're like, oh yeah, and here's the just in case document, and here's the just in case document.
Yeah.
And then here's this other document that says, just in case you'll come back here, and you sign a document saying that you'll come back and take care of these documents if need be. Yeah.